Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I would like to talk about the top 10 armies of November. In this series of video, I go over which Warhammer 40k armies had the most top 5 placings at GTs and major events during a certain month. So for this month, that month is November. Whatever armies had the most top 5 placings during that month get a higher spot on the list. How this video will determine an army's faction is based on which codex that army belongs to. For example, all the Space Marine chapters from the Space Marine Codex will be considered Space Marine armies, while stuff like Blood Angels will be their own army since they have their own codex. For armies that take units from multiple codexes, like Imperial armies, I will determine the main faction of that army by whichever sub-faction had the most points spent on it. So for example, if an army had 1200 points of Space Marines and 800 points of Mech, then that army will be considered a Space Marine army. And if multiple armies have the same amount of top 5 placings, then their tiebreaker for their placing on this list is going to be what their placings actually were at those tournaments. So basically, whoever had more first or second place finishes gets the higher spot and wins the tiebreaker. And that just about covers everything you need to know. So let's not waste any more time and let's just jump right into it. Number 10. Chaos Demons. The Demons of the Warp had a single top 5 placing during the month of November to give them a spot on this list. The army list is pretty much the old Jim Vessel style list, featuring mainly Nurgle demons and some Thousand Sons characters. This list is pretty much dead now in my opinion, due to changes that some of the units received in this year's chapter approved, and due to the changes in the meta with the introduction of Space Marines 2.0 and their supplements. The idea of this list is that the Plague Bearers screen for the Thousand Sons characters to allow them to cast spells with immunity from shooting, except against sniper fire, and then eventually tar pit some enemy units while leaving space for the characters to get into glorious melee combat, but also with expert positioning, still protecting the Thousand Sons characters from shooting on the following turn. This type of army was already a very high skill floor type army, but with the right pilot, it could be incredibly hard to deal with. With the changes from chapter approved though, this list would cost an extra 110 points, which is a significant amount. And with Space Marines being as prevalent as they are in the meta, the Plague Bearers just aren't what they used to be due to the amount of firepower Space Marine armies can bring, and also because of the way Space Marine rerolls work, since they now reroll everything instead of just natural misses. So the -1 or even -2 from the Plague Bearers isn't as good as it once was. It's still very good against a lot of armies, but against Space Marines, not so much, and Space Marines take up about 25% of the meta. Also, with Raven Guard being a thing now, it's pretty easy to get some sniper damage onto those Thousand Sons characters, even with the Plague Bearers screening for them. So overall, I think this is probably the last time that we'll see a Jim Vessel style list in the top 10 armies for a while. Number 9. Astra Military. The meat shield of the Imperium comes in number 9 this month with 2 top 5 placings during the month of November. The Guard have fallen a bit from being one of the top dogs in the meta, mainly due to the introduction of Space Marines 2.0 and their supplements. With that said, I think Guard are still incredibly good. I just think it's a lot harder to make them work. But some top players like Brandon Grant haven't given up on the army and are still trying to make pure Guard work in a meta full of Space Marines. Tank commanders are still probably one of the best unit choices for the army. They can give themselves reroll ones to hit with an order or shoot and pop smoke if needed, but to be honest, sticking with the reroll ones to hit is probably your best option. They also hit on 3s instead of hitting on 4s like most stuff in the army, so they're a bit better at shooting. They also get to shoot twice with their main gun if they stay still, and with Catachan you get to reroll your random number of shots, which is really good for when you get those low rolls. They are also toughness 8 with 12 wounds, so pretty beefy as well. And with the battle cannons, they are extremely long range, so you can park them in the back for pretty much most of the game and just start blasting like Danny DeVito. Taking a ton of infantry is pretty much needed in this meta as well, since guardsmen die pretty easily to anything as strong as a Swift Breeze. So their durability comes with numbers of multiple units. So most good lists that I've seen lately bring 9+ units of guardsmen, since it isn't unheard of for some armies to kill 30+ guardsmen in one turn. Basilisks and Wyverns are still good pickups, especially the Basilisks in the Space Marine meta, since they can help deal with stuff like Thunderfire cannons hiding in the Space Marines backfield and out of line of sight. Number 8. Chaos Space Marines. The Heretic Astartes get the 8th spot this month with 2 top 5 placings during November, with those placings being slightly better than Astra Militarum to beat them in the tiebreaker. The first list is a variation of the Purge Flawless Host list we've seen lately, featuring some Purge Forge World Dreads for some DACA and 3 Flawless Host Disco Lords for glorious melee combat. This list also includes a detachment of Chaos Knights with 1 Despoiler and 2 of the Forge World Armigers. The Purge Dreads work really well because they don't need a Chaos Lord nearby for rerolls, so they can spread out and avoid getting multiple units tied up at once, since that's really the biggest downside of these dreads is getting tied up or surrounded in close combat. But even if one dread does get surrounded in combat because they're spread out, the Purge have a stratagem to shoot into close combat so they can free up that dread. Or they can have the Knight or one of the Disco Lords act as a countercharge unit to help out in that regard as well. As for the Disco Lords, they work extremely well in Flawless Host because of the Flawless Host trait. which is that on hit rolls of 6+ they get extra attacks, and the Disco Lords give themselves +1 to hit, so this effect triggers on 5+, which usually nets a few or a ton of extra attacks when they charge, depending on how lucky they get. As for the second list, it also includes 3 Flawless Toast Disco Lords, but also includes Mortarion and other Heretic Astartes characters with some Nurgle Demon support and a Bloodthirster. Basically, this list is just what I'd call Hero Hammer, which is spamming a bunch of strong characters to get in there and put in some work. Number 7. Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights. That's right, this month all of the Knights are tied for 7th place, with both factions getting 2 top 5 placings, but those placings equaling out to be the same. Let's start with the Imperial Knights first. So I think Imperial Knights have been dropping down in the meta, mainly due to Space Marines. Not necessarily because Space Marines counter them, but because I assume a lot of people who were playing Chaos Knights switched over to play Space Marines, since most people who owned Imperial Knights usually have other Imperial armies, and the most popular Imperial army is Space Marines. So to me it makes sense, especially because Space Marines are being seen by a lot of top players as the current best army in the game due to getting a ton of great rules in their 2.0 codex and supplements. As for the Chaos Knights, they are pretty much good for all of the same reasons Imperial Knights are. They are super beefy, they hit like trucks, and they are actually pretty good at killing Space Marines with all of their high damage weapons with good AP. Number 6. Mech and Khari. So we have another tie this month between the Cog Boys and the S&M Boys. The first Mech list features the classic Stygian strategy with slingshotting Dragoons and a Termite drill with Electro Priests up the board before the game begins in order to get some easy charges off turn 1. This list does somewhat rely on getting first turn or having good terrain to hide behind when you move them before the game begins, which most GT and major boards now usually have that since they have 2 big L-shaped ruins in the middle of the board. It also features 3 Scorpius Disintegrators, which are great for shooting, probably my favorite unit in the army. And the second Mech list goes full on Mech instead of using allies, and basically just brings an incredibly strong gun line. More Scorpius tanks, the Disintegrators and the Dune Riders to transport some Skitarii into range, Onagers with neutron lasers, and a ton of infantry for board control, grabbing objectives, and also for shooting since they actually come with some decent guns, considering this player opted to bring 2 Plasma Calibers in each unit, which are great for killing Space Marines. For Khari, the first list is my favorite type of Khari list, which is Venom Spam. Lots of fast vehicles that can easily max out secondaries in the ITC like recon and behind enemy lines, while also having some decent shooting power. The Venoms are Inflated Skull, which is my personal favorite choice for them. They get an extra 3-inch movement for 19-inch movement altogether, they reroll once to hit, and they ignore cover. Pretty stacked to be honest. As for the Ravagers and Razorwings, they are Blackheart so they can benefit from the 6+ Feel No Pain, the Rid of the Living Muse rerolls, and also to gain access to Agents of Vect, which is probably the best stratagem in the game. Number 5. Genestealer Cult. The Scrotum Heads take the 5th spot this month with 3 top 5 placings during the month of November. So Genestealer is really interesting with some of the mechanics that they actually bring to the table. They're very unique in that regard. Their blip deployment makes it incredibly easy to counter deploy based on how your opponent deploys, even if you're going first, since you place your blips down instead of your actual units in deployment, and then you get to decide afterwards which units go where. They also have amazing deep strike shenanigans. They can do stuff like moving D6 inches closer to the enemy after arriving from reserves, or with the same stratagem can actually instead shoot the enemy as soon as they arrive. This actually works well when comboed with another stratagem that allows a unit to deep strike in within 3 inches of an enemy. So for this combo, you can deep strike in a unit of Acolytes with Hand Flamers 3 inches away from enemy units, and then use the previous stratagem to shoot them when they arrive. So you shoot at the end of your movement phase, and then again in the shooting phase. This can annihilate a ton of Toughness 3 infantry, or do decent damage against stuff like Space Marines. Or you can even string out the unit in a conga line and just use it to move block most of the enemy army, as long as the enemy army doesn't have the fly keyword. Another cool mechanic Genestealer Cult has is that all of its infantry can take wounds for its characters, almost like the drone mechanic from Tau. So they can have characters that live exponentially longer than they deserve to. Overall, I've always thought Genestealer Cult is one of the better armies in the game, but definitely one of the more difficult ones to pilot due to being sort of a glass cannon type army. But in the days of Space Marines, I think we will actually see less and less of Genestealer Cult armies, since Space Marines have some incredibly good anti-deep strike tools like Infiltrators and the stratagem Auspex Scan. Number 4. Tau Empire. The Gundam Wingers come in 4th this month with 4 top 5 placings during the month of November. The lists this time around are more or less what we've been seeing out of Tau for the past year or so. Triptide lists and Seeker Missile spam. Like I've said in past videos, Triptide works really well because it's 3 Riptides that are basically immune to damage while pumping out a ton of damage themselves each turn. The reason they are pretty much immune from damage is because of the Savior Protocol mechanic, which has tactical drones eating up wounds for them. Also, the whole army pretty much protects each other with the rule for the greater good, which allows their units to overwatch for each other to protect them from combat where Tau really doesn't want to be. And even if something does slip through and get into combat with the Riptides, well, your Riptides have the fly keyword and they can just leave combat and still shoot. Also, with having the fly keyword, the Riptides can actually park themselves on top of buildings if they can fit. And this makes them pretty much immune from charges, while also giving them an amazing vantage point for shooting. For the Seeker missile spam list, they make use of having a few marker lights on a target, which allows Seeker missiles to fire at normal ballistic skill, and then they just bombard the enemy with shots. Personally, I think Triptide lists are better than Seeker missile spam, but Seeker's missile spam is still coming in strong, mainly due to Devon Swan not giving up on the list. And now, before we talk about the top 3 armies of November, I have to pay my bills. So I'd like to ask that if you enjoy the channel and the content I produce, then I'd like you to check out the channel's Patreon. Patreon is currently the best way to help support the channel so that I can continue making videos like these. Many of you may not know this, but this YouTube channel is my full-time job and is my only source of income. So I put a ton of work into researching and making my videos while also helping out patrons through the services I provide through Patreon and treating my channel and everything related to it as my full-time job. So with that said, what do you get out of helping support the channel through Patreon? Well, you get exclusive access to the Almost Pro Gaming Discord server, where you can chat with myself and other patrons about the game we all love, or you can just look at pictures and memes. You can get custom lists built by myself for yourself, so you can finally stop second guessing your army build and beat your friends, or possibly upgrade so that you can finally win that local tournament you've been attending every month. Another service is that we can also have a voice chat once a month where we can go over some things about the game you may be struggling with, or even just have a friendly chat. All of these rewards are things that you can get through subscribing on Patreon, on top of the satisfaction of knowing that you're helping keep the Almost Pro Gaming channel alive. So if you're enjoying the channel a lot and would like to give back to the channel to show your appreciation, then check me out on Patreon. A link to the Patreon page will be in the description. Number 3, Necrons. What? Believe it or not, Necrons get the 3rd spot this month with 5 top 5 placings during the month of November. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure on why they suddenly became so strong, but I do have some educated guesses. Most Necron lists bring Doom Sights, and they come with a ridiculous Mortal Wounds stratagem. And Mortal Wounds are amazing against armies like Space Marines, and Space Marines are taking up 25% of the meta. Also, the range of their guns on stuff like their Destroyers and Doomsday Arcs are longer range than most Space Marine stuff, so they can sit back and blast away with not much shooting back at them. Also doing multiple damage a shot so that they can kill stuff like Intercessors or even Centurions pretty easily. And at this moment in time, to be honest, that's really all I can think of off the top of my head. I personally haven't played against Necrons in an incredibly long time. The last time was actually back in June of 2018 when I got second at that ITC major, since I don't really think there is anyone locally that plays Necrons on a competitive level. One of my friends though is currently building up a Necron army, so hopefully I can get some practice against them in the near future. Number 2, Craft Worlds. Santa's Little Killers come in at number 2 this month with 9 top 5 placings during the month of November. So we're seeing some new changes to Craft Worlds now, thanks to the release of the Psychic Awakening book Phoenix Rising. And that is the addition of custom Craft Worlds. The most popular custom craft world traits seem to be Expert Crafters, which allows a unit to reroll a single hit roll and a single wound roll, and Masterful Shots, which makes it so that your units ignore cover. The rerolls allows for your units to be a little bit more efficient, since even though it's only a single hit reroll and a single wound reroll for each unit, over the course of a game that adds up to a lot of rerolls. And the ignoring cover is incredibly good in this meta, since trying to kill Space Marines in cover without amazing AP is pretty damn hard. So stuff like Night Spinners become a lot more efficient at killing those Marines in cover. Dark Reapers are also making a comeback. I assume this is because they can outrange a bunch of Space Marine stuff while also doing multiple damage a shot, so they can pretty easily take down stuff like Centurions or even Space Marine vehicles. And another trait that I've seen used is Masters of Concealment, which gives your units cover if they are outside of 12 inches of the enemy that is shooting at them. This pretty much makes everything in your army a bit more durable as long as your opponent doesn't have an ignore cover ability as well. Other than those custom craft worlds though, Alaytok is still the most popular choice of craft world, mainly in flyer spam armies due to flyers becoming -2 to hit. But we also have a list featuring Ulthway and another list featuring Sam Han or Sam Hain and a bunch of bikers. I'm not that good at pronouncing names if you haven't figured that out by now. If you take a look through all these lists though, there's actually quite a lot of variety coming out of craft worlds now, which I think is incredibly good, especially after a few months of only really seeing flyer spam craft world armies. Variety is good for the game, and with the addition of Phoenix Rising and the points reductions from Chapter Approved 2019, I assume we will see a lot more variations in armies and craft world armies doing well going into the 2020 ITC season. And now before we get into the top army in November, let's go over some honorable mentions. These armies have won top 5 placing during the month of November, but that placing wasn't as good as AdMech's first place finish, so they lost out on the tiebreaker. So this month we have Thousand Suns with a second place finish, Tyranids with a second place finish, Orcs with a third place finish, Death Guard with a fourth place finish, and Blood Angels with a fifth place finish. I'm not going to show all the lists, but I'll show the Blood Angels and Death Guard since it's been a while since we've seen either of those armies in the top 10. For the Death Guard list, it features a Chaos Lord, Necrosius the Undying, a few units of Plague Marines, a Putrefier, 2 Blight Spawns, some Contemptors, some Plague Burst Crawlers, a Rhino, a Terrax Drill, and an allied detachment with Ahriman. As for the Blood Angels list, it features a couple of Smash Captains, a Librarian Dread, 3 units of Scouts, an Aggressor Squad, a Sanguinary Ancient, a unit of Sanguinary Guard, an Inceptor Squad, the Sanguinor, a couple of Infiltrator Squads, an Intercessor Squad, 3 Tactical Warsuits, and some Vanguard Vets. And now for the top army in November. Number 1. Space Marines. The Space Marines had a whopping 28 placings during the month of November, which gives them the first place spot on this list. This seems to be a reoccurring theme that will probably go on for quite some time, mainly due to 2 reasons. The first being that Space Marines are probably the strongest army in the game currently, and second, the fact that Space Marines are probably the most popular army in the game. So what happens when you take the most popular army in the game that everyone and their mother owns, and you make it the strongest army in the game? Well, now you get around 25% of the meta to start playing that army. In my research, I've noticed a lot of top players who used to play armies like Genestealer Cult drop that army in favor for Space Marines. Examples being Nick Nonavati and Nick Rose, who dropped Genestealer Cult for Marines. And also players like Alex Harrison, who dropped Craft Worlds for Space Marines. So not only are all the dedicated Marine players playing the army, but we also have people who owned Space Marines as a casual army picking them back up in favor of whatever else they were playing competitively. And now we also have top players dropping their older armies in order to purchase brand new Space Marine armies to play them in tournaments. Just take a look at the Games Workshop website. A lot of the units that are overused in these army lists have been sold out for months. And stuff like the Thunderfire Cannon, which recently came back in stock, was sold out again within a couple of days. The popularity of Space Marines combined with how strong Games Workshop made them was the perfect storm to mess up the meta, and bring Space Marines straight to the top of these top 10 videos since so many people are playing them that they're bound to just get top placings almost by default. As for the chapters used in these lists, I've broken it down for you guys and gals. So we have 2 Raven Guard Successor chapters, 1 Iron Hand Successor, 12 Iron Hands, 3 Imperial Fists, 4 Ultramarines, 1 Crimson Fists, 3 Raven Guard, and 3 White Scars. So Iron Hands is still the most represented in the top placings even after the nerfs, and I think this is due mainly to the fact that their best bonuses happen in the Devastator Doctrine, which the army starts in at the beginning of the game. And in these lists, they pretty much spam nothing but heavy weapons, so their whole army comes online in turn 1. You get rerolls of 1s for pretty much every unit in your army, extra -1 AP on pretty much every unit, and they can move and shoot their heavy weapons without penalty. So heavy weapons in general are forced to suffer -1 to hit when moving as a balance mechanic, and also because I assume for fluff reasons. But balance wise, the reason they suffer -1 to hit is because heavy weapons have the hardest hitting profiles out of every ranged weapon type in the game. But this army gets to ignore that and just use heavy weapons as if they're regular weapons with no downsides other than not being able to shoot with them when they advance. On top of that, each unit gets to naturally reroll 1s to hit, and without suffering the penalty for moving, you still hit on 3s because of Space Marine ballistic skill, and you'll reroll your 1s for some incredibly potent shooting. Also defensively, the Space Marines in general have some good defensive stratagems, like Transhuman Physiology and the stratagem to have the damage on a Dreadnought. But Iron Hands get even more defensive buffs like the Iron Stone, which can be activated on a vehicle to make it take 1 less damage from each shot it takes. But when you put this on a Dreadnought, and you combine it with the half damage stratagem, you get an almost unkillable Dread. There are definitely more shenanigans than this as well, but I'll just leave it at that for Iron Hands. As for the other chapters, they all have their own bullshit, quirky tactics as well. Like White Scars being able to deep strike in Assault Centurions, boosting them up to get +2 to charge either through a spell or a nearby chaplain, or Raven Guard who can deep strike Centurions and give them +2 to a charge with a chaplain, and a re-rollable charge if they only declare 1 unit as their charge target. Imperial Fists get extra damage against vehicles, so even things like Heavy Bolters are doing 2 damage a pop against vehicles while also having exploding 6s. And Ultramarines can move and count as if they haven't moved, so stuff like Aggressors get to double shoot all the time because their movement doesn't count as movement, and their heavy weapons don't suffer for moving and shooting either. This also triggers stuff like Bolter Discipline on Intercessors, so they're constantly rapid firing even if they're moving and not in actual rapid fire range. Overall, Space Marines have a ton of great options, and to be honest, although I did kind of just poke fun at them and make them sound like they're overpowered, I actually think it's a good thing. You can actually make a fluffy Space Marine army and it be competitively viable, which isn't really something you can say about an army like their Chaos counterparts, who have to spam Forge World Dreads and Disco Lords in order to stay relevant. So even though for now the army might seem like a little much, I honestly think these Space Marine changes are going to be good for the game. Not necessarily good for the game at this point in time, but eventually, once more codexes come out, once other armies get updated, I think this was a step in the right direction. And that's something I'll discuss a bit more in a video I'm working on, where I'll give my thoughts on power creep in Warhammer 40k. And that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more Warhammer 40k content like this. Also hit that bell icon if you want to be notified when I upload new videos. Let me know down in the comments what you guys and gals think of the current meta. I still read every comment on my videos, so I'd love to know your thoughts. Also, don't forget to check me out on Patreon and consider making a pledge. For pretty much the price of a couple of cups of coffee, you can help out the channel tremendously. It goes a long way in helping out me and the channel, so I can continue making great content like this for you guys and gals. And also, I will be making a separate video talking about this, but I'm going to be taking a break from making videos for a few weeks, mainly due to the holidays, but also because I want to get some work done behind the scenes. So anyways, that's it. Thanks to all my current patrons for being awesome and allowing me to make content like this for YouTube, and also thanks to all of you for watching and supporting my channel. Thanks for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one. Happy wargaming.